Hello, this is a short video on the long run aggregate supply. So we'll start with the LRAS curve, which is shown here. You can see that the LRAS curve indicates the full productive capacity of an economy. So that's shown by the full level of employment. You can see that next door we will have the long run Phillips curve. Remembering this shows the typical natural rate of unemployment. This will be explained later on in the video. Finally, we have the PPF. The PPF shows the combination of capital and consumer goods that can be produced with a given level of factors of production. This is also known as your factor endowment, such as land, labour, capital and entrepreneurship. That is, the quality and quantity of those factors of production is your factor endowment. So, obviously on the PPF, this shows our maximum potential, our productive capacity. And the productive capacity is same here as it is here. Okay. The long run Phillips curve here will be explained, as I say, later on in the video. So what happens? So quite simply, if the long run aggregate supply were to shift to the right, we would have an increase in our productive potential. That is the same as saying the PPF curve is shifting outwards. Consequently, if we have got more output, that means that there is going to be less unemployment. That is why this corresponds with the long run Phillips curve shifting to the left. Again, that's unemployment with the UN. And that's showing a decline, an improvement in the rate of unemployment. Unemployment is falling. So what are the factors that determine long-run aggregate supply? Well, as you know, for the short-run aggregate supply, it's related to the cost of production. But with the long-run aggregate supply, it is to do with the quality and quantity of the factors of production. So, for instance, if I were to send a large proportion of the population onto a training course, it may be that they develop skills in, for example, computer programming. As they become more skilled in computer programming, we will have a greater quantity of computer programmers, obviously capable of producing more goods and services within an economy. Also, the quality can improve through training. Therefore, if we have people who have more efficient ICT skills or math skills, that would mean that they could access higher order qualifications, again, computer programming or engineering. In short, it means that more goods and services can be produced, and it will lead to an increase in productivity. Productivity is the increase in output per worker per hour. So if there's increased productivity, it's an increase in output per worker per hour. In other words, we're getting more output from our existing inputs. So explaining the shape of the long-run aggregate supply curve. So I'm just going to change the colour here. So, as we've explained in our lessons, it's this side, the AD, that determines, make it clearer, it's the AD, NAS diagram that determines the Phillips curve. Think of the Phillips curve as just as simply a scatter graph that plots inflation and unemployment. Beg your pardon. So, for instance, if I start at A, we can say that if the government wants to get more people into work, it could increase spending. This obviously leads to an injection in the circular flow, and as injections will exceed withdrawals, AD shifts to the right. So we get from A to B. what we've experienced is an increase in real output, in other words, GDP, which is the same as an increase in employment and a fall in unemployment. Just think about that link. To get more GDP, more people need to be in work. So, we've also got from P1 to P2 an increase in the price level. So, as the blue line shows, I take P1 across, I mark A. A here is exactly the same as A there. Okay, you can see Y1 matches Y1. So what happened? Well, we've said that AD shifted to the right. On this further diagram to the left, AD shifted to the right from A to B, and this led to an increase in GDP. Consequently, unemployment fell from Y1 to Y2. This led to an increase in the price level. Again, look on the previous diagram, AD and AS, and we ended up here. So we got to B. This showed that if we want to reduce the level of unemployment, we have to accept a higher inflation, which obviously can be detrimental if it is above the 3% maximum target of the Bank of England. Remembering 2% is the target, and it can be 1% above or 1% below. So we've got from A to B. To reiterate, government increases spending. There's an injection in the circular flow. AD shifts to the right, AD1 to AD2. But we've now got to B. So what's happened is there's greater demand for workers at B, but those workers have realised as well that their wages have been eroded. So the inflation that occurred between A and B has the effect of reducing their real income. Remembering real income is your wage that takes into consideration a change in the price level. So if you can't afford to buy as many goods and services in the shop because the price has gone up to P2, you are going to talk to your boss and say, look, I went in, I had my wage negotiation with you at P1, and I asked for, and I was happy with the wage you offered initially. But since that conversation, we've experienced inflation to P2. Consequently, I want a wage increase. So, assuming that there is a wage increase, what will happen is that as wages is a factor of production, and therefore wage increase represents an increase in the cost of production, we will shift from SRAS1 to SRAS2. Again, if you look at the green part here, the price has gone up, again, P2 to P3, and that corresponds to P2 to P3 on the diagram to the right, the Phillips curve. So, also, if you look at the bottom of the ADAS diagram, GDP fell from Y2 to Y3. So if GDP falls, that is the same as saying unemployment has increased. So think about it. GDP's gone down, fewer people are needed to produce the goods, some workers have been laid off, so consequently unemployment has increased. So we get to C on the Phillips curve. So from B to C, we've experienced unemployment. Well, what's the effect of that? Well, if there's more unemployment, consumption will fall because there's less disposable income for the consumer, and AD will shift now. I'll just amend the diagram here. AD will shift from AD2 to AD3. The price level will consequently fall from P3 to P4. Again, reiterate, because there's been a reduction in aggregate demand. You can see that this fall in the price level from P3 to P4, put P4 in here, P3 to P4, price has gone down, has meant, beg your pardon, lost train of thought. So the price has gone down from C to D, so the price has gone down, And because the price has gone down, we can see that GDP has fallen also at the same time. Because GDP has fallen, employment has fallen, and therefore unemployment must have gone up. So price down, unemployment up, this purple part. So it's the mirror image of what you're seeing on the other side of the screen. So what happens next? Well, we've now got these workers, more people out of work. So the number of people out of work is likely to exceed the demand for the job. So what happens? Obviously, wages are likely to fall. Well, they will fall according to the classicalists. So as wages fall, the costs of employing them will reduce. Therefore, the firms can hire labour more cheaply. Short-run aggregate supply 2 will shift to the right to become 3. We've now returned to point A. So why is this important? Well, what you find is that over time, we will constantly get back to the long-run aggregate supply level, which is the mirror image of the long-run Phillips curve. We've said roughly that's about 5% is the natural rate of unemployment. So in other words, we get this boost from Y1 to Y2, but it's not going to stay at B. All what's going to happen is it's going to lead to higher prices. So when we're here, we can say that there's an equilibrium when we're along the long-run aggregate supply curve. But if we get to this point, there's a disequilibrium. We are not going to stay at this point. Prices are going to rise. Disequilibrium here, because we're below our full capacity, prices will actually decrease. Wage price spiral. So our final part of today's talk about the long-run aggregate supply, the wage price spiral. Pretty simple, really. You've got A to B. So we've said that the government wants to employ more people. And so the government might suggest that in conjunction with the Bank of England, remembering the Bank of England determine interest rates, that there's a cut in the interest rate. So if there's a cut in the interest rate and there's a cut in the tax rates and increased government spending. So you're getting the idea. I'm talking about injections and withdrawals. So as long as injections are increasing, withdrawals are falling, AD will shift to the right. If AD shifts to the right, A to B, there's going to be the higher price level here. This higher price level, okay, so just to reiterate, A to A is where we started. We've got more GDP, Y1 to Y2. That means employment has increased and unemployment has fallen, as shown on here. Remembering that's unemployment. So we get to here. So A to B. So as we've now at B, because of the increase in aggregate demand, experienced the higher price level, the consequence is that workers who initially accepted P1, maybe say 1%, 2% pay rise, now want a higher percent pay rise to maintain their purchasing power. In other words, they want their real income to be maintained. So if their nominal income, so they're paid £1,000 for a week, if they're fortunate enough to earn that much, was to remain unchanged, but their prices were to double, well, obviously they can purchase half the amount of goods that they were originally purchasing. So they want their income to increase. So what's going to happen is they will ask for a pay rise. So as they ask for a pay rise, short-run aggregate supply will shift from SRAS 1 to SRAS 2. This will lead to a new price level. So we're back in equilibrium here. Equilibrium meaning just leave it. Don't increase aggregate demand because all you're going to get is inflation. So bearing that in mind, what does any government do? Here. It's basically going to ask for, it's basically going to implement an increase in spending to try and get more people into work. What's the consequence of trying to get more people into work at P4 this time? Well, all that's going to happen is that they're going to ask for higher wage rates. So short-run aggregate supply is going to shift to the left, okay, because they want a higher wage rate to represent the higher cost of living at P4. And so what we end up with is something which looks like, choose a different colour. This wage price spiral. Thank you for listening.